Go for it. Welcome, everyone. It's time to stop calling connection seeking with Sandi Phoenix and just go right ahead and start.
Thank you, everyone. So I am Sandi Phoenix. I'm the founder of the Phoenix Cups framework and principal facilitator at Phoenix Support for Educators. My husband, Chris, and I wrote the Phoenix Cups book and launched that in January this year. And that's a novel about our framework where Chris brings in his philosophy and we kind of tie that in with the psychology that I have used within the framework to create a story that connects these ideas about wellbeing and philosophy to adult human behaviour. But let's go back to the origins of the Phoenix Cups framework, which was my work teaching educators and working with children's behaviour. Particularly, I want to look at one of the cups. And so the cups represent basic human life needs. But I've now realized that a lot of you are new to the framework. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of what that's about. And I apologize to those of you who have seen this stuff a lot, but what I do find is that the repetition here helps you to explain the framework to other people as well. But I was a massive Babysitters Club fan as a child. And you know how you have to read the first chapter and it's the same thing, introducing the characters over and over again? Sometimes I feel like I'm living that in my life because every single framework, like I want to tell the rest of the story every session, but I've got to do the first chapter first and say, well, this is the framework and it's really repetitive. But hopefully you're learning something in there. But for those of you who are new to this, I do need to step out a little bit of the theory and the philosophy behind the framework and then show you what it looks like now and how it has looked in the past. And so I'm just going to take you on that bit of a journey before I talk about connection seeking particularly. And so I'll click my button here and show you, this is what I hear a lot and I'm talking, okay, let's go back 20 years. I started my career in 1998, started studying psychology and was an educator. And a lot of the time when I was supporting, later in my career, when I was supporting educators around inclusion and behaviour, I was asking the question, what do you think the function of this child's behaviour is? Over and over again, every interview I had, every coaching session, every time I was supporting behaviour at a service. And I heard the same thing every single time. He's attention seeking or she's attention seeking. Yet there's no evidence to suggest that attention drives human behaviour. There's not a lot of research to give any weight to that idea at all. Being a behaviourist, when I started my career, I was trained in psychology, and we can't help it, particularly when we were trained in psychology more than 20 years ago, that behaviourism come hand in hand with our psychology training. So behaviourism is very much around rewarding and punishing behaviour, using consequences, using positive reinforcement to shape, manipulate and control behaviour. Now, I've very much changed lanes in the last half of my career into a guidance approach. And when you decide upon a guidance approach, you really have to reject those notions. But if we can sort of separate those two ideas around working with children's behaviour into a controlling approach. This is an idea from my colleague Louise Porter. There's a controlling approach to managing behaviour, and then there's a guiding approach to behavioural and social learning. And so from a controlling approach, we see a great deal of practices still occurring within education and care and early childhood teaching and practices. And so then and still now, when I ask the question, what do you think the function of this behaviour is? Educators will often say they're attention seeking. And so a solution to attention seeking, and if you Google this, you'll unfortunately find a very famous super nanny displaying a video about how to use tactical ignoring and planned attention to manipulate and control the child's behaviour. And so some of the solutions that you will find if you're looking for a solution around attention seeking is listed on the screen there: tactical ignoring, planned attention, catch them being good, positive reinforcement, and time out from positive reinforcement, which was a term coined by the behaviourists, particularly around their work in labs with rats and cats and cages and mazes, and somehow made it into classrooms as time out or thinking time or responsible thinking corner or chair or whatever you want to call that. So though when we've got that behavior management paradigm guiding our practices and guiding our language, it's really problematic to the actual needs of the child. So my mission has been to change and shift that paradigm away from controlling approaches of managing behavior and towards a more respectful approach of understanding human behavior and guiding children's behavioural and social learning. So I'll come back to this idea of attention seeking, but a little bit of a background on where I'm at now, coming from being a behaviourist and being really well trained in that. I even got trained as an ABA therapist, applied behavioural analysis, and I totally reject those notions now. But now I'm guided a lot more by the space in positive psychology as well as guidance approach. So, and of course I graffiti everything with cups. That is a beautiful artwork about the positive psychology in a nutshell book by Anu Boniwell, which is a really nice encapsulation of where we're at with positive psych at the moment. But before this idea of positive psychology was brought about, Dr. William Glasser, I was introduced to his work in the early 2000s, and I was really excited by choice theory. And Dr. William Glasser said, all we do is behave. In his choice theory, he was essentially saying from when we're born until we die, we're just a string of behaviors. And every single behavior we choose at any given point in time is a behavior we are choosing to meet one of our needs. So where Glasser says we're constantly choosing behaviors to meet one of our needs, I'm going to suggest that we're always choosing behaviors to fill one of our cups. So we're going to represent those basic human life needs through an analogy about cups. Now, if those cups were guided by choice theory, which they were when I started using this analogy, they would, and if choice theory were cups, they would look like this: freedom, survival, love and belonging, power and fun. If you're familiar with choice theory, you feel familiar with all of the words on those screen there. The first time I presented about this was the Sydney Early Years Conference in 2014, and that was the slide I used. Then, and it's been a really steep learning curve for me, and this framework kind of grew wings and flew away from me, and I've had to really work hard to rein it in and continue its evolution from the idea of choice theory, because choice theory was developed on the back of control theory in the 80s and 90s, and we've got a lot more research and evidence since to really flesh out some of these ideas and refine some of the needs. Now, you're familiar with another framework around basic human life needs, aren't you? One that you would have learnt in your studies. Who knows what that might be? What's a basic human life needs framework that you know about where there's a hierarchy of needs? Maslow's. Yeah, thank you for jumping in there, both in message and in voice. Yes, so let's have a look at some of the other frameworks around needs. So we've got the hierarchy of needs there, of course, Maslow's famous hierarchy. Now, what I found interesting about Glasser is that he said we didn't have this neat little hierarchy with physiological needs for everyone on the bottom, and then safety needs and belonging needs and esteem needs. They weren't stacked neatly for everybody. What Glasser talked about was a needs strengths profile. And in our framework, we call that a cups profile, and we talk about it being big and small cups. Glasser talked about it being strong and weak needs. So a strong need for power in his framework, for example, a person with a strong need for power has a whole set of other behavioural sets than a person who has a strong need for love and belonging. So you can see how a person driven by those two different needs are going to display different behavioural choices. So by the same token, we talk about having big and smaller cups depending on our own unique needs profile. Just by the way that Glasser said, this needs profile is genetic. It's given to us by our parents, like our hair colour and our eye colour, it doesn't change. So for that reason, we talk about the cups also being static and genetic. So if you have a big mastery cup, which is our equivalent to power, if you have a big mastery cup now, then it is likely that that mastery cup was really big when you were small, and it'll stay big your whole lifespan because it's genetically gifted to you. Dr. Louise Porter, my colleague who I work really closely with now to deliver the masterclass throughout Australia, is her and I have worked together on the latest iteration of the Phoenix Cups framework. Her model she developed in 1994 of human needs. And if you've done anything with Louise Porter, you would have seen this model before because she's been using it for as long. And so we looked at hers, we looked at Glass's, we looked at Maslow's. Louise and I have been doing work for a couple of years together when she said, Sandy, we need to, we really need to change the cups. And I just told her to shut up for about 2 years, and I didn't want to hear it because I had a lot of artwork done around it and I was really attached to the choice theory behind it. But there were holes in it. The problems were particularly around the power cup. People were, if they hadn't read choice theory, or even if they had read choice theory but hadn't read a lot about a need for power, or hadn't learned a lot about a need for power, or looked at all the different philosophies and ideas behind that, then there's this immediate assumption that the need for power is negative. So you can hear the connotation in that power need. And so people were, they were bitching about their colleagues, or the one with the big power cup, or they were, if I was there to see a child about behavior, they would say, oh, there's our big power cup over there. And I'm like, whoa, stop talking about it like it's so bad. It's just a need. It's not good or bad. It just is. So, and then, just the same way, people were talking about the connection need, or in that, we used to call it the love cup, because we were using Glass's language. They were talking about that need as though it was good, but the power need was bad. And so we needed some words that neutralized it. And we also needed some words that were bringing in more of positive psychology, also what we knew about neuroscience. So Louise and I worked together to create a little bit more of a refined framework, together with my husband, Chris, who is a hypnotist and also really intensely obsessed with philosophy. And so we were bringing in some of his ideas from philosophy as well. And so first of all, before we changed the name of the cups, and Louise said, we need to create some synergy between your cups and my model. I said to her, here, look, I've got a solution. I'll just whack cups on a tree. And Louise was like, that's not going to cut it, Sandy. So we had to go back to the drawing board, and we'd already evolved from the power cup, starting to think differently about it, but then we landed on these ideas of moving it to mastery, love to connection, survival to a need for safety, and we kept freedom and fun the same. But what we found was the framework needed outcomes. So then we added outcomes to a full cup. So and again, based on a lot of Louise's existing research and some of the information we've had since choice theory was published. Now, if you're not familiar with Louise Porter, she's written 26 textbooks. I mean, my bookshelf is full of her textbooks. That's all Louise there. And that's just, of course, some of them. But one of her textbooks that I love, Young Children's Behaviour, and another one, Classroom Management, the whole book is around needs. And so we really pulled out a lot of the research behind that, and we added these outcomes. So self-competence is the outcome of a full mastery cup. Autonomy is the outcome of a full freedom cup. When our connection cup is full, we have self-worth. And on the back of the keynote this morning and Karen's information in her breakout session, connection is obviously something that we're all talking about because it is so, so important. And we're getting more and more research every day to suggest that we're on the right track there. And when a connection cup is full, we say that a person has a good, strong sense of self-worth. When their safety cup is full, they have security. And when their fun cup is full, they have joy. The other thing that Louise has done a lot of work and research around within her PhD and her other work is the ideas around self-esteem. If you've done any work with Louise, you'll already know this, but she talks about two components of self-esteem, one being self-competence and the other being self-worth. And you can see how we've tied this in here because when a person has a full mastery cup and a full connection cup, they've got a good, strong sense of self-esteem. So when self-esteem is impacted, it's because one of those cups is empty or not as full as it could be. Then we wrote the book and have really pulled things together. And this, I have uploaded this download as for you to download from the chat box. This is the outcome, the whole model in a nutshell on one pager. So you can download that, and you'll find more about it on, you know, all of our social media and our website and such. Before we, and I'm just checking time. Okay, good. Before we get into connection, I just want to give you one more brief overview of a couple of the cups, but only just vary a little bit. There's the book, and on the website where the book is, it's called phoenixcups.com.au. You can do a quiz to work out your needs strengths profile, to work out the big and small sizes of your cups. So here we have the newest graphics to align with the brand, with the release of the book. And that's probably what you'll see most often now within our stuff. And now let's just have a little bit of a look now at each of those individual cups. And you can start to have a bit of a think about what your needs strengths profile might look like. When we can get this idea within ourselves and really understand all of the stuff behind it, then we can apply it to the children and the other people that we're working with. So we'll just have one more moment to think about it within yourself. And then I do a whole presentation around the needs within your team, but and within yourself. But I'll just really quickly go over these infographics. These are actually, you can find them in many different places on our social media. If you can't find them particularly and you want them, I think they're on our website as well. Just shoot me an email and I'll find a link for you. But these are some infographics that we've just put together so that people can talk within their teams around these needs and try to determine their own needs profile. What's really important to know is that everyone has every one of the cups. So some of you might have a really big mastery cup like me, mine is massive, and some of you might have a smaller one, and neither is good or bad or right or wrong. We just have different needs profiles. And so the other thing that could happen when you work out your needs profile, if you're struggling to work out which of the cups is your biggest, it might be because you're quite balanced in your needs profile and your cups are all similar sized. So some people have a needs profile that's very unbalanced like mine, massive mastery cup, tiny, tiny safety cup. And so if yours is like that, then you'll pretty much know straight away, oh, that one's me. But if you're not sure, it might be because some of your cups are more evenly sized. And you'll get an idea with that when you do the quiz. Which will give you numbers, and if your number is 10, 11 or 12 in a cup size, that's a very big cup. If it's 0, 1 or 2, that's very small. If you've got numbers like 7, 6, 7, 6, 5, they're all very similar size, and I wouldn't even say that they're any different in size to each other. So the fun cup is another, so I'm just putting these on the screen rather than reading them out for you, but the fun cup has traits like play and excitement, learning and novelty and humor. You know the person in your team who's the fun cup, because they are the ones doing, you know, like kind of office chair racing up and down the hallway when you're trying to start a staff meeting. And it's when there's two fun cups in your team, they tend to sit together because, you know, we hang out with people that get us. We hang out with people with similar needs profile. And when two fun cups sit together during your staff meeting, they do that secret fun cup language and drive everybody that's not big fun cups crazy. So you can pick the big fun cups, right? The mastery cups, however, probably organize the meeting. They'll make sure it starts on time, finishes on time, and everyone's organized. The safety cups, we need to cater the meeting for safety cups. They do need their rest, and they also, so we need to finish on time for them too, and they will appreciate a good cheese platter. They do things like comfort food is a thing that they invented, and the Netflix binge. Safety cups love a good Netflix binge. Now we've all got, so even my cup is small of this. When it's empty, I also need to do those behaviors, but you know, beyond those kind of behaviors, there is that security, predictability, trust, are all really important to our safety cups. Connection cups, you can also pick the biggest connection cup at your meeting because they're the ones hugging everyone and making sure everyone's okay. And then there's other people that go, no, not hugging everyone. So the little tiny incy wincy connection cups who don't do the hugging, and you know, hugging's a behavior that we can use to explain connection cup, but it's not one of the only ones. But if a person has a really small connection cup and they don't like the hugging, you know, they're kind of sitting over there during the group hug going, yeah, don't touch me and I won't touch you and we'll all get along, okay? But the big connection cups are the ones going to be wanting to really connect with everybody and be close to everybody. Oh, good. Joanne's mastery cup is huge. Yeah, I picked that. I can pick fellow mastery cups. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. Susan, get it. I know us connection cups that need hugs. This is killing us during COVID. We're like, but we want to hug everybody. How do we do this? So yeah, we're the ones making up other ways of connecting as well. But it is, it's been really impacting people's connection cup levels while they haven't been able to get this usual hugging stuff going on. And we have to develop new behavioral choices during this time. Which is unprecedented. That's a word we've gotten used to hearing, isn't it? And the freedom cups. So you're lucky if they actually make it to staff meetings. They tend not to come to work after hours. Thank you very much. But the freedom cups are also excellent at connecting with nature, helping children to connect with nature, understanding children's needs for creativity. And so we've all got these different strengths that we bring because of our dominant cups. And within a team, they make up these beautiful pieces of the puzzle that just work. The problem is when our needs profiles are different to each other, sometimes we can annoy each other. So I annoy people with really small mastery cups because they don't understand my behaviors. And I really have to be intentional about understanding the behaviors of a person with a really big safety cup because it doesn't come innate to me. It's not intuitive to me because I haven't practiced safety cup filling behaviors very well. Okay, so that's the quick rundown, and I feel like that's very, very brief, but I really want to talk about this connection stuff. So a couple of things to note from that. Our profile doesn't change. So if that's what your profile looks like, it'll always be that way. I know people want to argue with me about this, but I'm just going to say, like, we've written about it quite a bit in the book, but there are things that change. One is how full or empty our cups are. They change a lot throughout our lifespan, even throughout the day. And the things, your cup fillers, the things you choose to fill up your cups, they change entirely. So when you were 6 months of age, and you needed to fill up your need for a safety because you were hungry at 2 a.m., you chose a very different set of behavioral choices than the ones you choose now. I assume nobody still wakes up screaming for mum to get pizza out of the fridge or something. So we have different sets of behavioral choices because of our brain maturation and our body growth and maturation, as well as our skills and our abilities and our learning and, you know, all the amazing complex things that make us human. So you can have this discussion around needs, and it will help move away from that paradigm of management to one of understanding needs and the guidance approach when you talk about your own needs as educators and in your team. So I do often say to people, have a chat with your team, get them to do the quiz, talk about what their needs profile looks like. Once they get used to talking about their own needs, then they can talk about the children's needs as well and understand the diversity within the children's needs profiles as well. Okay, so that's where you can do the quiz. Chris reckons our Bitmojis are just like better looking versions of us, so we're using them a lot. They're so cute. But the book is there as well, and I know a lot of centres now have it, which is really exciting because we didn't actually write it just for educators. We wrote it for all the humans, but we are finding that a lot of teams are buying it. But you can, you know, see free book readings, and there's lots of free stuff. You don't need to buy anything. Okay, so a notion in the book that I want to talk about, which is necessary for our conversation around connection cup filling with children, is that needs are driven unconsciously. And this is not something new. This is, I mean, Freud talked about the unconscious drive. Will to life and actualizing tendency are also not new ideas. Will to life, a philosopher by the name of Schopenhauer. The will to power is a philosopher by the name of Nietzsche. Actualizing tendency is Maslow and Rogers. So these ideas essentially for us encapsulate the empty part of the cup. So when a cup is emptying, and I've got a cup of water here. That's how the Phoenix Cups framework came about, because I was teaching a classroom full of educators and I was trying to find something to give an example about a need. And I was actually talking about the need for love and belonging and connection, and had a cup in front of me. So the need, so that's how much is in the cup. And then this big empty bit is driving behaviors to fill it back up again, which is a really adaptive thing for us to do as human beings to make sure we get our needs met. So what we would, when we were writing in the book about what do we call this collective thing that people have talked about, this drive to go about getting our needs. At this point, Chris came up with this brilliant idea, and I realized he was a genius because he can rhyme: the will to fill. And so we went, yes, it's not just the will to life or the will to power. This is about filling all of our cups, and we all have a will to fill. So if we look specifically at the connection cup, The will to fill is the empty part of the cup. And so if this is a child's needs profile, then let's have a look at, and if for those of you who've done Educator's Toolkit for Behaviour with me, you'll know Jaden and Sally's story really well, but you don't need to know that to look at this image. So let's say we're looking at Jaden's needs profile there and Sally's needs profile. We can see that Jaden's connection cup is quite empty. We're not looking through his other cups, but we can see his connection cup is very empty. Sally's connection cup is much bigger than Jaden's, but Jaden has a bigger will to fill because of how empty his connection cup is. And the story goes that, you know, Jaden's really experiencing some challenges in his life. So the will to fill being the empty part of the cup, let's look at Jaden and Sally's connection cup side by side. That means the full part of the cup, now if you remember from the overview of the framework that I showed you, self-worth happens when a cup is full. So we can see here the amount of self-worth that Sally has in her very full connection cup compared to the amount of self-worth in Jaden's cup. So now we've got this kind of perfect storm of behaviours happening, because we've got an empty cup, we've got a very little bit of self-worth, we've got a huge will to fill that cup. Also, when a cup gets empty, and you'll know this from your own needs, when one of your cups get empty, it can, when it gets really empty, it'll trigger a stress response. So you'll get that fight, flight, freeze response starting to happen the emptier the cup gets. So because Jaden's cup here is so empty, he's also got a stress response, which then turns off the outer cortex of the brain and starts, and I'm so glad Karen's been talking about this a lot already, and it will kick him into using that fight, flight, freeze part, that amygdala in the limbic system of the brain, which means all of the really excellent skills that he has to fill up his cups go out the window. All the language that he uses around that, they go out the window. So again, perfect storm of behaviours that some people call challenging behaviours. I don't call them challenging behaviours. I call them behaviours that challenge me. And there's behaviours that challenge you, and those are different. And behaviours that challenge my other colleague, and you know this, right? And so does Jaden, because he uses a different set of behaviours for you than he does for your colleague. So empty part of the cup is the will to fill. So there's another thing I need to introduce you to. Why do children choose different behaviours than adults to fill their cups? Now I know you're skilled teachers, you could brainstorm lots and lots of different reasons why adults and children choose different behaviours to fill up our cups. One of the reasons I'm going to suggest is that children are efficient and effective cup fillers. They just go about getting their needs met. And that sometimes means being not considerate or not cooperative. They'll learn that stuff, but it is much more efficient to get your needs met when you're not being considerate or cooperative, isn't it? And that also requires the prefrontal cortex, which, as we've learned from Karen's sessions today, is not yet developed. So there is this filter that we use as adults to fill up our cups. Sometimes if we're frustrated in the middle of a shopping centre, for example, we might want to fill up our empty mastery cup all of a sudden, but it goes through a filter. I can't do that because, oh, that'll kick me out of the shopping centre, or I can't do that, or I could get put in jail, or I can't do that because that'll be embarrassing. So we've got this filter, which when I was writing about the empty part of the cup and and we're looking at the will to fill, and then what do we call this filter? That's when I realized I was as smart as my husband, because I can also rhyme the skill to fill. So we call that in the Phoenix Cups framework, the skill to fill, and that requires, it's developed throughout with our brain maturation, and it requires that outer cortex and the prefrontal cortex as well, which is, as we've also learned today, if you're in Karen's last session, which is fully developed at around about 30, 32 years of age for most men, for many men. So, and for women in our mid-20s. So the brain grows from the inside to the outside and from the back to the front. And up here in that prefrontal cortex, the last to mature and develop, is where we're really going to refine the skill to fill our cups. So sometimes when people are teaching and working with young children, they're expecting the skill to fill to be able to access that prefrontal cortex, which is not yet fully matured and not capable of doing that. So the skill to fill is having a set of behavioural choices that will reliably and predictably ensure our needs are met or will eventually be met. Right, now we've got that intro. There's a couple of questions I'd like to just leave you to reflect on before I go right into a connection plan. But that is the way we're raising children in early childhood settings in schools, as connection cut filling as it could be. And another is, are our interaction ratios connection cut filling? And so that's one of the things that I want to look at, because children have a right to have their needs met, and they have a right to have their connection cut filled. That doesn't do it. Behaviour management doesn't fill connection cups. It doesn't fill cups, actually. I know, because you're at this conference, that you don't do that stuff. And if you do, it probably goes against your values and you're doing it because you have to. But I also know that you still see it a lot of the time, if you're out there in the big wide world. And so there is, because I see it a lot, because I go where the challenging behaviours are. And as a behaviour consultant, and this is what I see, challenging behaviours like these sticker charts. And I have to try and behaviour manage them out of the educators. But it is because we can't do better until we know better, and when we know better, we do better. But if this is the tool we've been given in our training, then this is the tool we're going to use, right? So to move away from controlling, again, to that guidance approach, we need some tools. So there was a time, though, where I used sticker charts. I hate admitting this. One day I'm going to stop admitting it. I'm just going to keep it a secret. But I did use them, lots of them, because I was trained in it very well. I knew operant conditioning inside out. I could tell you all the principles and practices and how to do that effectively. And I was an educator with children, and doing that in an inclusive setting that had a lot of children with additional needs and special education rights in the space. So I used charts and stickers and M&Ms. In 2001, I was even guilty of using M&Ms and bribes. But when you know better, you do better. And that happened when I was introduced to choice theory, and when I realized that there were people like Alfie Cohn and Dr. Louise Porter and Dan Gartrell all talking amazing things around the guidance approach that sat so much better with my values. But after I changed lanes and realized that we couldn't do that anymore, I wanted to know why they worked, because there were times when we had them working. I was a positive behaviour support officer across 19 school-aged care services and 2 long day care services at the point where I was using them the most. And there was one particular incident where it worked so well that it managed to get the child included in the space, everybody in the safe space, in the whole space safe, which was one of the biggest problems with this child's inclusion. And so I wanted to know, why did it work for that child? The short story of that child was it was in a school aged care setting, and he actually took a knife from home and put it in his school bag and kept it there all day because he hated his coordinator at after school care that much. And in the afternoon, when she really pissed him off, he pulled that out and had her bailed up against a wall, at which point they call the positive behaviour support, who comes racing over, and we make a plan. And so I was insisting on including this child, and of course that didn't go down too well. But I told the team that if I could make this work in 2 weeks, then we have a deal. And if I can't, then they have a deal and we will exclude him. So we gave this a whirl. What I asked them to do was, because this is the only tool I had in my toolkit being a behaviourist at the time, was we created a behaviour chart. We asked them to positively reinforce the child's behaviour 3 times every 15 minutes. And by putting he loved cars, putting a car sticker on the little road. When he had 5, he got to pick out of the stupid prize box. And at the end of the week, he got to go to the movies with his mum. 2 days in, the coordinator called and said, your stupid sticker chart isn't working. And I said, why? And she said, well, we can't catch him being good because he's never good. And I said, that's okay. We just need to change the bar. So now, using my psychology textbooks and psychology knowing, I said, right, we're going to now only reinforce approximations towards the desired behavior. We're not going to reinforce the whole behavior. So that means if you're trying to reinforce him to come and sit at group time, instead you're going to say, ask everyone to join you for group time. And if he looks at you, you're going to say, thank you for looking at me, Jacob. I really love getting your attention. Can you go and put a sticker on your sticker chart before coming to sit with me at group time? Please don't write notes on this. This is not how we do it now. But that was what we were doing then, because that was the best tool we had, right? So that worked. Then after a week, I went to visit the service and things were going so well. After 2 weeks, we didn't need the sticker chart anymore. When I first visited, I couldn't believe my eyes as I walked up to this service, and the coordinator had her arm over the child and they were talking and laughing, and they hated each other, literally, like they really despised each other. You could see the disgust in their faces when I first started working with them. And now they're so connected. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, sticker charts work. There's magic in these sticker charts. And it really did work in this instance. So years later, when I was trying to work out what was that about, what I realized was that there is no magic in sticker charts to support this attention-seeking behavior we had determined. The magic is in the chart's ability to increase the frequency that the educator initiates and reciprocates positive interactions. It was all about connection and nothing to do with sticker charts, nothing to do with happy, sad face, nothing to do with, you know, any of those other things that we see out there still, but the magic is in the interactions and the connections. So when I saw, just a couple of years ago, when I saw yet another sticker chart made viral on Pinterest, I was thinking, how are we ever going to get rid of these things when they're just being shared so much? And so I wanted to create a counter to the sticker charts. And then sometimes I positively reinforce myself. But I thought, I have a plan. And here's my plan. I thought, if adults really like rewards so much, I'll give them a sticker chart that they can use on themselves. So I'm giving this to you because if you see a teacher using a sticker chart, you can say, I've got something more effective for you. And you can give them this. So this is what it looks like. There is a whole bunch of connections. And so this is the cheats version. And then you can download it from the chat box. So this is the one that I've made. So you could do all of those things. And some of the things that Karen mentioned are in here already as well, like sustained shared interaction. I'm also a big believer in that serve and return that was being talked about. So we can use that. Now this is for the teacher to do. This is for the educator to do. Have those connections as much as you can. Try to, maybe you'll get 5 in a row. Maybe you'll get, oh, look at that. Put your own stickers on there. Maybe you'll get the whole thing done. But initially I did this in a bit of a jest, but then services that I was working with contacted me and said, that latest download you made is really working. And I said to them, this particular service, I've just interviewed them about it for the Early Childhood Australia Learning Hub. I said to them at the AIS Institute in Canberra, I said, you don't need this, you already do cup filling. And they said, no, we've just found it so good for being intentional about our connections, just for a moment. And what they ended up doing was using the flip side of the chart, which is create your own. And they wrote really detailed connection plans for the children who were really needing it, who were doing what parents and some educators were calling attention seeking. So we made a connection plan because of course it's not attention seeking, because there's no attention cup. There's no need for attention that humans have. We have a need for connection. So when children are connection seeking, we need to match that need for connection with a connection plan. And so this plan is also based on the notion of Gottman's magic ratio. And that's this is the last little gem I want to leave you with to do a bit more research around it, because if you're not familiar with Gottman's magic ratio, you're going to love it. You can follow the Gottman Institute on Facebook. They're still doing heaps of research now. John and Julie Gottman did research in the 70s and beyond. They've just been doing amazing things forever. The research that they did was around adults in marriage relationships. And they identified, they did something really amazing actually. They were able to predict divorce in couples after 7 years of observing their interaction ratios based on the ratio that they had. So, the way that they did this was observed couples interacting during a conflict, like in the lab, not creeping through their lounge room window or anything weird like that. So, which does make it a little bit tricky being in a lab, but they counted the ratio. What they found was after 7 years, couples who had a 5-to-1 interaction ratio, being 5 positive to 1 negative, stayed married. Anything less than that, they were divorced. Then they were able to accurately predict divorce in people, which made their research so famous because that certainly hadn't been done before. So from there, a lot of researchers have replicated this stuff with parent to child, teacher to child. And they're finding that not only is it maybe 5 to 1, but it might be 6 to 1 or 8 to 1, which makes it harder. So we're going to stick to 5 to 1. But it does stay true if we can do that as well. If we can increase the amount of connections we're having with children and make them more like 5 positives to 1 negative, then we're going to have a more connected relationship, and that child is going to work with us to guide their behavioural and social learning. So there is another tool that I haven't uploaded here. It is, I can email it to you, but you can also find it on my website. So this, which is the Phoenix Support for Educators website, I might add. So this one is around counting the negatives that are happening for Jaden or Jacob or Jordan or Jackson or Josie or whoever it might be that is the spirited child in your space. And so some of the things that I count when I'm watching those interactions is I'll see walking feet inside, put your hat on, no, don't stop, calling out his name like Jaden, and then threats and thinking time is still happening and denying requests and those sorts of things. So they all stack up. Sometimes I will observe 40 negative interactions in a space that are said very sweetly with a smile on our faces before the child receives a positive. But it doesn't matter if we're receiving a negative sweetly with a smile on someone's face. When somebody delivers you a negative like that, like they correct your behavior or they direct your behavior, you will count that internally as a negative. It will slowly chip away at your relationship with them if they don't balance it with enough positives. So, and children are human, and so they're exactly the same when it comes to this stuff. So they need 5 connections before we deliver one of these correctives or directives. So if we look at the Gottman's magic ratio, then our positive interactions should be much heavier on that scale than our negative interactions, and we should be able to see that. It is a really interesting exercise if you're a leader to do a bit of a count and write down the interactions that are happening within a space and see what the ratio is happening in there. I have a solution because I know that sometimes in 3 minutes, talk really fast, just as well this is recorded. You can slow me down on recording. Some people find that useful. So this is one of the instances where I saw an educator come up with a brilliant strategy to neutralize a negative. First of all, the first day that I observed the interaction, they were asking the child to come to a mandatory group time. Now, this service worked with me for a few years, and they don't actually do mandatory group times now. They do voluntary invitations to learn and play. But they used to do mandatory group times, and they were trying to get Jackson to come and sit on the mat. And so those were the interactions that were being said, all in a row. So once we've got 4 negative interactions like that, Jackson, come and sit on the mat, we're waiting for you, Jackson, you know, so on. If we look at the 1 to 5, 4 of those negatives then means we need 20 positives. That's impossible. The only way we're going to be able to get this 1 to 5 is by reducing the negatives. We can use the connection plan and increase the positives. That's going to help, but we also need to reduce the negatives because there's no way we can give all the children that many interactions in a day. So one of the ways that I use to reduce a negative is, and just neutralize it, is say what you see, ask a question. And so we'd run through this the day before, and then the next day when this happened, the educator asked Jackson to join us once. He refused. And so she went and used to say what you see, ask a question. And she said to him, Jackson, this is what she said, "You look really busy. Do you need more time?" And Jackson looked up at her like, yes, it's weird that you asked me that, and then looked at me like, did you do that? And I was like, yes, just keep going. And he then was offered time to do something else rather than come to group time. And this was the beginning of their voluntary group times. And not only did that happen, but this child then engaged in something for 2 hours. This story I talked about last year. I talked about this story actually when I talked about Fun Cup at this conference, and I that was in ECTA's journal last year around Jackson and the Fun Cup and Jetpack Man. And you can find it in lots of different places. It's just called Jetpack Man. So that was the beginning of Jetpack Man's story. And it was because these educators decided that they were going to minimize the amount of corrective and directive interactions they were giving to children. So in summary, those strategies that we can reduce some of those directives is say what you see, ask a question. We can use a pattern interrupt, like just sort of change environment or swap out educators. And the other thing, and I don't think I've got too much time to elaborate on it, is what I call the Steve Irwin. And the Steve Irwin is when you say what you see, ask a question, but you do it with a pattern interrupt. So you do it in a really big way, like Steve would, like I channel Steve Irwin and become the most interesting thing in the room. And then I use the say what you see, ask a question if I really need to break the pattern of something that's happening. So that's kind of briefly what some of the strategies that I use for that. But the strategy I wanted to talk about the most was this one around the idea of she's just attention seeking. And rather than use those solutions that we talked about at the start that come from behaviorism, that come from behavior management, of tactical ignoring and planned attention and all of those things, instead, can we make a connection plan that's relevant to the child? If a child is attention seeking, they're not attention seeking, they're connection seeking, and they need connection, and we need to plan for it because they're not getting enough that they need in the space. And it's probably because their connection cup is so big. So in summary, behavior management, let's cross that management line out there. It's my mission to stop educators and teachers using that terminology because it's getting us stuck in a paradigm of managing children's behavior. Is children's behavior ours to manage? If they're connection seeking, do we need to manage it? Or do we need to support children in their behavioural and social learning? Because you can't behaviour manage empty cups. And so you can start by moving with parents away from this as well by this is a poster that we have in our Phoenix Cups community group as a download, which is on Facebook. So, and I can also send it to anyone who wants it, but just starting to reframe some of that language when you hear it. And this is one of the ways that I do so is when parents are saying he's just attention seeking, ignore him. I let them know that their child is attention seeking, is not attention seeking, they're connection seeking. And we're going to support them through a connection plan. And so I hope you'll join me on that mission to move away from trying to behavior manage empty cups and instead fill cups and support children to have their needs met, because children have a right to have their needs met. Thank you so much for joining me. I apologize the speed at which I spoke, but we did lose a bit of time. So feel free to shoot me questions. I am keeping an eye on this down the comments there, and I can just answer those as they come in. The handout is, if you scroll up, you'll see the handout at the top there. I hope that's there, and if it's not, I can repost it or I can email it. So thank you so much everyone for this power session. It was great to have you join me, and please do connect on Facebook or social media or by email. I'm Sandi Phoenix on Facebook. I love friends. It fills my connection cup, so feel free to friend me. Enjoy the rest of the conference, everyone.
Thank you so much. Sorry about the little hiccup at the beginning, but thank you so much for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.